Hello and welcome to the Digital Health Hackers podcast. Today I have a very special guest, Christopher Jones, who is the founder of MatchRite Care. Now, Christopher, we have a lot to get into in this episode, but then what's your story?
I guess it's a story like any other. I guess I'm a family guy, and I've had some turmoils in my life that kind of drove me to do what I do now. I think there's always a why, of how people kind of get connected in the things they do and what drives them. And I'm no different than most in that case. I've been in healthcare for over 23 years, in IT for over 25, 26 years. But I just was recently got into the healthcare space over the last 10 years, based on necessity of just having your patient's records, unified in one spot. I went on to the last 10 years, my first healthcare career, our first healthcare tenure in healthcare on the corporate side was I worked for a home health company. And that home health company had hospice, it had home health and pediatrics all tied in one. And we worked with four different EMRs within that system. And that was my first kind of tenure inside of the healthcare space and EMR space, which really got me caught into the healthcare space. I know we get into some more, but a little bit further in my background before I got into the healthcare space. Unfortunately, I had a 5-year-old that was diagnosed with cancer that had a brain tumor. And when he got diagnosed, the doctor gave him 1 year to live within that time frame. 1 year to live rather, and within that time frame, unfortunately, we missed a clinical trial because we didn't get his medical records in time. Then I would go on 6 years later and be in the healthcare space. So I was able to see the headaches on both sides of it, right? Just as a consumer of healthcare data and being a patient there, the need for you to have healthcare records at the time that you need them is important. But I also understand in my professional side that for providers not being able to have the healthcare records in a timely manner, help with the value of care. So we just started working this platform or this idea of MatchRite in 2018, and here we are now today. And I'm excited about what we've learned. I'm excited about the growth that we've had over the last few years.
So, what do you say when someone asks you, what does MatchRite do?
Yeah, so the simplest format explanation for that is MatchRite is a unified health record portal, right? It really just unifies the records of patients in one simple platform. And then we created this common data set that's unique to us that allows us now to aggregate data no matter what hospital is located, what EMR is connected to. Our role is to create that unified health portal for the patient. It's really important for us that we make it legible for the patient because they are the center of the care to where they understand any information that comes to the hospital. They understand what the information is and how to distribute that information out to the people they need to distribute it to.
Got it. So this is mainly focused on the patient and how they can get access to their own information across different institutes.
Yeah, that's where it started at. It was more so for me is that I wanted to stay outside the bureaucratic process of healthcare. I've been around this. I've watched meaningful use. I watched it go into a different phase of that than the all the things that the government was trying to push the patients to the center of healthcare. My focus was really to ride that wave, is really focus on the patient side of it. I think there's a lot of things that goes in the bureaucratic process that we tried to stay away from. We really wanted to focus on the patient and make sure that it was unified. These records were unified for the patients to be able to use it. So I think that's what kind of made us unique is that we never really got involved in all the politics of this, right? Our goal was really make sure that the patient had the access when they need it. And we didn't necessarily go again where we felt like the revenue was at initially. We were just focused on where the value was, and we stayed on that wave because it was just. I gave you my story before, is that I had a son that lost his life, and looking back on the clinical trial, he wasn't able to get in. It doesn't mean that it would have saved him or changed anything in his healthcare, but we missed that opportunity. So my goal was to make sure that patients never miss the opportunity again. If it means that we have to connect with all the EMRs individually and not tied to any of the bureaucratic process of healthcare, then we was going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if we are seeing a lot of people on the other side of the spectrum, right? Like Redox, Health Gorilla, and all of them
Yeah.
aggregate, but then they provide it mostly to other enterprises so that they can get access to this information. But I think you've taken this unique journey of trying to put the patient first and then trying to get, like unlock as much value for the patient as you can, right? So as a business, what have what have you learned? How are your customers? Are they just patients? What kind of patients use the platform?
Yeah, so what we focus on again for me was really make sure patient had access. All those other entities are definitely needed, right? Without the health gorillas, redox of the world, healthcare would not move, right? In that space, it necessarily had to have the facility connections. Well, my focus was is really being able to give patients access to the records that they needed. So if a patient wanted to connect in a rural location, they had a hospital in a rural location and they want to connect to a larger hospital in the city, that those necessarily don't talk to each other, and they're forced to make those hospital talks. And those the bureaucratic process of healthcare lies in that space, right? Because it's hard to get a rural hospital to have the same type system that a larger city hospital might have. And that's where you start seeing the bureaucratic process start to grow and really swell. What we decided was that if we put the patient at the center of that, it shouldn't matter, right? In that case, on what EMR what the hospital is using, because the patient only cares about getting their records, and those are the patients that we target, right? And to take a step further, is that more acute issue patients are dealing with. Again, my son had a rare disease; he had a brain tumor, and it was 2009 when he went through that, and here it is, it's 2025, and it's not really different. Nothing's changed as much on data records exchange. But my goal is that if we put patients in the center that really is dealing with multiple providers, need to have multiple connection points or touch points in their health, that they're able to get those records and unify those and carry those with them. Even from a VA perspective, is seeing some of that stuff too, is from a veterans, is that they have VA records, but moving those between large hospitals is just as complicated as well, right? So those are the people that we target that really have meaningful use for those records. We're starting to learn over time that just being able to connect with the patients that we have, that the information that the patient have is useful in a lot of many ways. I know we probably dive into that too, from research, from third-party applications we now plug into and things that we do. But what we want to do is make sure that when the patients connect and they have their information in unified in our portal, that it becomes almost a source of truth, right? It's a source of truth that allows the patient now not only to have information from a hospital, but maybe a clinic that doesn't necessarily talk to each other. Is that we want to do what we did right and well, right? So we want to make sure when the patient has access to it, is that you can trust the information that patient have is what's in the system. It's not always going to be updated, but that allows them now to make those updates and changes because now they have that source of truth where the information came from.
So
And
just
let
for the
everybody else handle
y-
yeah,
y-
let everybody else handle the facility to facility exchange, right? We just live in our space, right, in our lane.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very important thing to like. I want the audience to understand that the de facto way in which information is transmitted in the healthcare space today, in the US mainly, is not through the patient. It takes all sorts of other channels. Like there is the
Yeah.
hospital to hospital, hospital to network to hospital, hospital to. So there is like all of these other channels, which is
Yeah.
what Chris here is like trying to avoid, which is it's highly bureaucratic. It's highly, inefficient. They lose a lot of information. But I think with MatchRite, what you're trying to do is you want to make that it's almost a disruptive change in that sense, right? Like you're able to do the things for 10x cheaper or like 10x faster, 10x more efficiently because
Yeah.
the patient is the center point and you're able to put the data in their hands first and then everybody
Yeah.
else accesses it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's important to like in a journey of this, right? It's funny because when I first started, we started connecting with Epic, then we hit Cerner, we went on to Meditate, we just kept doing our own. And it was funny as we started connecting these EMRs and then adding these hospitals over time, I understood at some point I would have to interject with the bureaucratic process, right? At some point I would have to tap into the HIEs and all these other entities that's the care qualities and all that stuff in the world. But the goal for us was just let's see how far we can get independently without ever having to intersect in the bureaucratic, just healthcare process. Ironically for me is that as we did that, I every time I thought we have to interject, we continue to build more, right? We just continue to grow and grow and grow and make connection points and realize over time is that we can make this independent connection. We can go pretty deep independently, in that space. And that's kind of where we are now. So it's uniquely for us is like, how do we leverage, what we have to connect with the larger facility groups or that's connected out to now. We've built our own connection points and we kind of hold on to that. So we kind of are like, our weird little way, our own engine, right? Behind the scenes, right, for the patient. But we give that to the patient. But that is a useful tool now because now we want to empower the patient to walk around with as much information as possible, but not only be able to walk around with as much information as possible, but be able to put some utility to it, right? Be able to share it and communicate that information back and forth. And it's a powerful tool. We take pride in what we do is putting the patient first. We absolutely do that. So we built the technology really for the patient to be able to connect to. And now we're seeing the other side of how it can benefit, some of the research and third party applications of the world now. We're excited about where we see it headed. We just recently started opening up our APIs to feed our data into third party applications and stuff. So really excited about that. It's been a journey. It was a lot of unknowns, but I think I always stick back to my why was unique because um, um, losing my son CJ, it was always I always felt like MatchRite had a piece of him in it, right? So it was always never to shortchange it, right, for the patient. And sometimes it makes you a little crazy and focused, right? Where everybody else is like, "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you focusing so heavily in one direction?" But my why was strong, and I'm grateful where we are now. It's going to be interesting to see over the last few years on what we can do and how we can utilize this patient access tool that we have.
I mean, in a sense, I feel your timing couldn't have been better, right? Like if you had maybe gone on this journey like 5, 10 years before you had started, then the G10 wouldn't be a thing. The ONC and the ASTP's regulations for EHRs opening
Yeah,
up patient access
yeah,
wasn't that big. But
yeah.
what what do you feel that the change in what EHRs are able to provide you with now versus
Yeah.
before?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't really like I talk about, the bureaucratic process of healthcare, but I'm very aware of it too, right? So when I first started my journey, I'll share this, is I had the opportunity to go to Dev Days in 2019. And those are it was in Washington at the time in Seattle, at Microsoft campus. And at that point, that's when I was able to present MatchRite for the first time, right? We were part of a startup group. I met a lot of great people there. And I remember one of the judges for that panel was Mickey Tripathi. And I'll never forget it, right? And after I posted, I was just 1 year in this journey, right? I was still passionate about it, not really knowing the networking of it. But I remember when I ran to Mickey, and when he was one of the judges, and he pulled me to the side, never forget what he told me. He said, "You're 2 years ahead of where things are headed," because he was already telling me where the ONC rooms are going. So 2021 and all that stuff, and all 2022 is when it really happened. But in the meantime, it was almost 3 or 4 years when it happened because COVID hit, right? Kind of slowed everything down. But I remember that conversation, and then he probably don't even remember this. He probably will remember this, but he took me and introduced me to somebody in the Microsoft space that was part of the Health Vault team of Microsoft. And I remember sitting down talking with that group and what we were building. And that conversation was a 20-minute conversation with one of their engineers. And it led me in a direction where I needed to go. Even in the last 3 or 4 years, when things were like getting more and more complicated, especially when COVID hit, because everybody moved to telehealth, we still stay focused on the medical record side of it and continue to build from there. But it was one thing in that, and I kind of owe my journey and my focus to him in that, and he probably don't even realize that, but pulling me aside and telling me that and hearing it from him was letting me know like you're heading the right direction. And he was kind of telling me somewhere it's a lonely road, right? But it's not one of those roads that you have to ignore, right? If you're passionate about it, keep moving there because there is going to be regulations. Getting to your point, there is rules and regulations that's happening. So I may have had a cheat code in some of that, right? Because I was told where it was headed by somebody that knows, but I contribute a lot of my focus to that, right? So as these regulations start getting pushed and moved, we're already aware of that. I will tell you this, one thing we try not to do, what I tried not to really start to be focused on is we didn't want to be distributive information, right? Of how this new rulings work. There's a lot of experts in that. What I always felt like is that instead of educating people on how these rules and stuff work, I think the rules are put in place for us to build, right? There's a lot of education around, all right, here's what you need to do, here's what happens. It's great to have it, but my focus was like, there's a lot of people doing education on that. How do we build, right? Because I think at the end of the day, for a patient, they don't really know all the regulations or rules. And I went through that trying to explain them like, hey, the new ruling's coming out, so here's how it benefits your records and stuff. None of the patient really cared about that. They're glad it exists because we can build stuff on it. But more so they want to know is what are the tools I can use now that exist. Most people I felt was preaching about how these tools exist, but not putting applications to it right for the patients and troops. And I kind of felt like that was our role, and that's kind of what we lived in. So we weren't out there preaching the politics of it or any of that. We just continue to build.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really, really good way to put it, which is just don't, less talk, more showing, and more, like actually showing the use cases that they can get out of it. So this also brings me, like, because you said Microsoft, we're seeing a lot of tech giants, right? Like Microsoft, Google, all of them had some sort of a health vault product at some point, right? And then they just discontinue it after a while. And I don't know. What do you think? Is it because they don't find a way in which they can monetize it? What is your take on if you're providing value to the patient? How are you monetizing and how are you running a business?
Yeah, so it's hard to grow something that's supposed to be interoperable, right? Like healthcare in that space, because most of the times, if you're doing it, if you're especially a large entity, you're doing it for some sort of profit, right? That there's some gross margin or some targets that you have to have and meet. So being interoperable means that you have to share information, right, in between each other, which sometimes dig into your major asset, which is what your data, right? So there's always going to be barriers or limits to, in my eyes, on how far the large entities go. It's almost like if you have a big ship, right? You got these big ships on shore. A lot of times they can't come as close to the shore. What do they send little rowboats, right, to get close to the shore? And those are what I consider the third party operators, smaller companies like us that what we can help connect that last mile. So sometimes the larger ships would consider, what I consider large healthcare companies, is that they can, it's two things that they have problems with. It's hard for them to shift and change and make adjustments because they're so large in the sea, but also those large ships, it's hard for them to get close enough to the shore to connect with the people, right? So when we look at ourselves, is we're the rowboats that has to exist to run around it. They both have to exist. You need the large entities to do the large work, but you also need the small application things that we're doing to really get closer to the people where they can't reach.
Very good analogy. Like so in a sense, this has to be done by a smaller player, and they need to.
In conjunction.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's a very nice way to see it. So, what does the MatchRite platform look like today, and what can people do? Just walk me through a flow. How does it look like?
Yeah, so with MatchRite current platform now, it allows a patient to go in and connect, log into the portal, create an account. You can also put your a loved one, or if you're a caregiver taking care of a patient, you could get multiple profiles on that, right? Because it was important for us now is that older people that may not be as tech savvy need the support of a loved one to be able to carry their records and share their records. And it's important for us not to only just give you access to your records, but also create profiles to where you can manage other records, right? And we started doing that, and we started growing into connecting to multiple EMRs. Right now, we connect to 16 of them independently, including the VA, the Veteran Affairs, and we allow them to pull the records through. And then we unify and we pull them into what we call our common data set. And our common data set really exists for medications, labs, and that stuff. And we go into the smaller EMRs that's in rural areas, all the way to Greenway Health, right? We connect with all of those. Greenway Health all the way to Epic is what's important for us. And for the patient, no matter where they pull their record in, it always looks the same for them, no matter if it comes from Greenway Health or Epic. When it comes to our system, our goal again was to make it legible for the patient to where they don't recognize whatever they won't recognize what EMR the hospital is using because they don't really care. They just want to make sure data's there exists and come out. And that was the main thing that we focused on, and we worked tirelessly between every MR. We make those connections ourselves. We don't go to third-party application. We're making all those connections ourselves to make sure that we can connect and pull the information in. We also take it a step further is we allow the patients to be able to share that data, right? So there's two parts of our platform. One part is where the patient can aggregate that data. But there's also a part that where a facility, if it's a school or if it's a lab or if it's a hospital, can sign into the other side of our platform and they communicate between each other. So the patient is allowed to now share the information with anybody that has the other side of the platform, no matter what facility that is. And that sits right. And what's important for us to make sure all that sits right within our platform to where it doesn't go out into it taps into any of the HIEs and all those things that exist. We want to again make sure it was as independent as possible. We can move and pull that data in later. But it was important now that the patient and whoever's on the other side that had a one-to-one connection on that data was really important for us.
Right. So, I mean, it's definitely, quite a bit of normalizing to do from various sources. Although we have FHIR and we have all these standards, they always implement some version of like their own,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that. So I'll share this story, and I don't get into the technical world of this because I know I'll leave that for the big facility exchanges. But what was really interesting when we first started is that we were connected with SRm&x first, and then we started bringing in Meditech, and we were looking at some of the just disparity between SRm&x at the time. And I'm in Kansas City, so I'm in SRm, so I have a lot of connections that I can tap into at SRm at that time. And what's interesting is at that time, Cerner was doing a lot around the connection piece, and Epic was not necessarily advanced as they were on this part. And I remember when Epic was this is how far we go back, and I remember when Epic was starting to add some of their EMR connection points, those URLs, those endpoints and stuff for us to be able to connect to their APIs. I remember Cerner was way ahead, right, of where Epic was. But I recognized what Epic was doing over time is they didn't roll out all of them individually as what Cerner was doing. Epic was creating a batch of them right at once. They were working all at once. So when they shot their APIs out, we were able to connect to it. They started to grow and grow past that. Then you look at the next gens and the Greenways of the world. If you connect with those APIs, you can notice that they're even more advanced than Epic because they're a smaller ship to move around. But when you connect with those APIs, they're a lot more frequent. They're a lot more easy to connect to. You get to the Greenways, they're still trying to figure their way out. So you see a lot of nuances between all EMRs, and we just that's what we did. We worked that pattern. On the outside of that, what you see from our platform is the patient gets access to it, but they never see the work that we're doing behind the scenes to make sure that access is complete and useful. And that's one of the things that we take pride in is that we don't come out and beat on chest about what we're doing. We're just making sure the output is the same, right, for the patient, no matter what EMR we're connected to. We give the same love and attention to Greenway and this IntelliChart as we do at Epic and Cerner, because at the end of the day is what's important that we pull out of there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's if a patient has that important vital piece of information stuck in a smaller EHR, it doesn't make it any less relevant. Yeah. So, Chris, can we see what your platform looks like, or do we have something that we can show our audience?
Yeah, I'll pull up a demo here so I'll give you some outlook there. Sure.
Yep.
No, if I just. So just the basic layout of MatchRite is again, our navigations are on the left side there. So we always start with the profile screen that allows you to create a profile, just like any other platform. It also allows you now to embed in dependents. Those dependents can be anywhere, a loved one, a caregiver, a child, it doesn't matter, but you can add a dependent as well. Pretty standard, straightforward. And then also what we do is really the import record side of it. So we do two things, right? So we allow you to import your records, no matter where your records are located at. We're connected to over 40,000 hospitals now. On the left side, you see where our import record screen is. On the right side gives you the list of all the records that we've imported so far. So this is a demo. So I'll pull in some of my son's information here too. But what I'll do is I'll go back and connect to any of the portals. And when you pull that information in, just like any other standard platform, it starts to pull out what we call in our 8 categories of what it breaks down to, right, in that sense. So once you pull the information in, you choose the dependent that you're sharing. If it's Christina, we'll use her. So, it'll give you vitals, your medications, it'll give you any procedures, I give you the conditions if they're there. And my son, bless his heart, you can see I pulling his information to get his diagnosis. It even breaks down the labs. And again, this is my son here, and it'll give you the details on that lab. right, as well. So it keeps going down. Immunizations, it connects to that. Allergies, it'll give you the allergy information. And even doctor visit notes, we'll pull in doctor visit notes as well. And again, I'll share my son's information where it pulls the information in. This is our example of normalizing that. This is my information. This is my way, our way of normalizing that information here.
This is
So
like real data flowing from real EHRs. Yeah.
real data coming from real EHRs, and it's dynamic. As you can change and make updates, if they want to go re-import data here, they can just start the process all over again and just kick it off, back off, and it kicks right back out to the server and updates that data too. It goes through the process as well, and it just allows you to pull the information in. So you see the process of how this information get pulled in. This is Cerner, of course, so it'll import your records, but it's in real time, right? So it allows you to pull those records in, and it's real time, real data that allows you now to kind of see your information. Now, what's unique about this too, as well, that each one of these categories allows you to put notes on that as well, and all this information once, so you can put notes on each category. So each category have its ability to put notes on it. So if medication has changed or updated, whatever, you can put notes on that category and be able to share that information as well. So we kind of took it a step further, and we were like, all right, well, we have those records there. What's the next use? We're like, well, let's share, right? So on the other side of our platform, what we created, right, that kind of sits independent, and all this sits in with one platform is that if you're a doctor and have the other side of our platform, or if you're an organization, right, we could share it to organization. And what that means is that you can go into this doctor organization, this doctor, and share this information, and allows you to share, pick who you want to share, whose information you want to share, but also the vitals to give you all of those 8 categories. There they are again, and also the notes that goes along with them. You decide what you want to share, and once you hit share, it then allows you now to see the other side. So I showed the other side of our platform as well, to where what a provider or a facility may see. And what that is that once you log over here, the provider or caregiver would have a platform. And as a patient shares information, more and more of these patients, Christina Donner, you saw we just shared Christina, more and more of the patients will start populate here in your section here. What that does is it allows the patient now go, or the provider who's ever received the information to receive a real-time share of that information. Again, you're starting to see the same information that you saw over there. You start to see that same information now populating inside of the doctor's view now. So the patient is making changes, it's real-time changes that the doctors be able to see as well. What's unique about this is this really opens up. I want to go a step back further. What we've done, we've built this platform to where we can share with providers, and you see how they talk to each other. What we've just recently done, we open up our APIs to where if you decide to share, the patient decide to share, it doesn't have to go to our platform. We can share it with the APIs to where any third-party app can ingest it. We also built a single sign-on to where if you want to build into different application, they can sit this information inside of a third-party application now. If there's an EMR that we want to connect with and build it, we can do that as well. But we really want to push the idea that the patient does have control. If you want to get those records somewhere, they can get those records from our side of our platform. So that's kind of where you get a lot of my thought process. Again, is, as you see, is that none of this sits inside of any of the HIEs or any of that stuff, whatever. It really is independently sit within a platform, and it's uniquely set that way. A lot of people was pushing us to sit inside of the EMRs and stuff. That's down the line. AI and all that stuff can happen down the line. And it goes back to what I said before. We want to make sure that what we had was a source of truth, right? That you can trust. The information that we pulled out came from the EMR, and what's being shared is truly from the EMRs and truly from the hospital. It matches what the hospital have in their database too. It's where MatchRite existing was started from.
Got it. So that's where the name comes from.
It matches the patient, yeah.
Matches
matches the patient.
Excellent.
Yeah, it matches the patient.
And here,
So I think,
the patient here, just to reiterate, they're able to pull data from multiple EHRs on the patient side, but on the provider side, you are also providing a view of all of this data through the patient, right? Like, so I think that is unique. I've never seen anyone do this well,
yeah.
right? So that's quite unique. And Chris,
And I think,
yep.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking, like, I think you started on this journey because of your son, right? And you started building all of this. Now, how would things have been different if this was available to you back then?
It would have been that's a really good point, and it's really touching. I think for me, if I had these records, even just to view the records, because I'll take it personally. And the reason why I showed you, I'm gonna go back and put it in real time for you. Um, is for CJ, that's my son that passed, is that said it was a scan, right here, the scan. So what CJ needed at the time, right, was a scan of his x-rays. He had a brain tumor. And what the clinical trial needed at that point was a view of his records, is what they needed. And in order to do that at that time, there was no EMR connection or any point. There was a disc that we had to mail out and send over to him, and that's how we missed it because of that time delay. But what this does now in real time is if I had this in place, I'd be sharing this with the clinical trial right now, or even pulling this down because I would have it in my own possession. And then if we're working with clinical trials, they could immediately have this information right now to the provider. And the reason why we don't connect with, and I think this is really important for me, is the reason why we don't connect and we stay out the bureaucratic process of that as much as possible is because when I went through this with CJ, I told myself I would never be dependent on anybody else as if I don't have to. If I can have full control of this in my hands, I would make sure that we wouldn't have to be at least buried by lack of connecting with a doctor or lack of hospital. So when CJ, my son, when he was sick after I missed that clinical trial, I would sit in the hospital after he had a scan. I would sit in the hospital for 2 hours at least until they handed me that disc, right? So I would always have it at the time. So for me, my journey kind of leads right here. What you just document right here is what drove me, right? Is to be able to have this when I need it, right? This document right here speaks to where my power in driving this was. Now, beyond that, CJ had a brain scan, but somebody else might need labs, or somebody else may be important to need the procedure or that stuff. And that's why we drove not just to stop at labs where I needed, but different acute issues needs different things, and they need to be unified. So it was important for me to be able to put these things in perspective. And I guess my son don't. I'm trusting my son signed off on me. I can share his information, so he won't come back to sue me. But that's why it was important to me. And as we went on this journey, I understood even more and more is that the less we have to tie into some of the technology that exists, some of the legacy software, some of the bureaucratic stuff that's tied, the more efficient we can be. And I think I mentioned that before, is that we went a long way, right? A long way around trying to avoid tapping into HIEs and the rest of those things if we didn't have to, right? We want to see how powerful we can get, or how powerful a tool we can make for the patient without having to tap into that. And those are all important. They exist. I think there's time for that too. But we want to see how far we can get just connecting on behalf of the patient. And this is kind of where we landed.
That's Chris. I mean, I'm really sorry that you had to go through all of this, but then I'm pretty sure there are hundreds of people today, right? Some of them might even be watching this. Just knowing what is possible today might change someone's outcome, right? Like maybe this can be integrated with a research trial matching API or something. And it just makes me so happy to see that, from you sitting at the hospital waiting for a CD, that you actually went out here and like you built it and you are now able to access that same information digitally. It's a very inspiring journey.
No, I appreciate that. I think I'm more inspired. I'm more inspired by the people that took it on, that didn't have the pain point that I had. Right. My why was sometimes could be a headache for most because I was so driven on it. And again, I didn't go where the money was. We built all this stuff independently, right? We just went out and built and made the connections for it, not knowing where it would end. But all I knew is that in order for it to truly work, is it had to be as independent as possible, but be able to have Legos connect to the HIEs, the rest of that stuff. So this is not where we start. And here's what's interesting about this. This is where we're getting started, right? This is kind of, and I guess this podcast is one of them. is really to say, all right, here's where we're at. I understand what everybody's talking about, what they're doing, what everybody kind of here's what we're doing, and how do we fit in? How do we help with that? So we've started to open up those APIs now to where now we're not just sharing it with ourselves, right? It's open to where if you want to connect with our patient, what they used to call what it started early on was a digital front door to the patient. You remember that term? They used to call it a
Yep.
digital front door to the patient. So I always still coin that term, right? I think we got away from it because everything is more facility driven. But I
Mm.
really wanted to create that digital front door to the patient and stayed in that term, right? It never scared me off because I felt like in order for this to truly work, the patient would have to set the center. What's interesting about all this, everything that we showed, everything we connected, everything that we've done, all the EMRs are connected with. I'll be honest, I think this is just the foundation, right, for us to really make some meaningful connections. And we've talked about the things that we can possibly do on top of this, right? I really see this as a floor. As crazy as that sounds, this is just a floor for us. It's really the grow and build on top of it. We want to do one thing well. We want to make sure that we can aggregate data at least uniquely in one spot and without any headaches, right? Without any roadblocks as much as possible. So we did all the work ourselves. Like we didn't plug into the existing condition, all those other APIs and third party applications that's out there purposely, right? We were looking at what they were doing. Is all right, we can do it ourselves, but we were doing on behalf of the patient, in that standpoint. There's been a lot of opportunity for us just recent few months about using this engine, right? The engine of MatchRite that we have existing, how we can plug those things into other applications that can make it more useful. But what's really interesting is that the AI side of things, right? Because I always talk about AI, and everybody was asking me about that, a year ago, back when AI was starting to get popular more. Is that I didn't want to focus on the AI side of stuff. I wanted to focus more on like in order for AI to be successful, the data has to be meaningful, right? So we wanted to start where we wanted to be the foundations, make sure that when you have that data, we can pull it, you can trust it, you know where it came from, and it's a lot of data there to help make the right decisions on AI. So if you think about the space in AI and where it's headed now, we want to be the foundation of that, right? Could we be a source of truth with a lot of meaningful information and go right to the patient and avoid the headaches, right, of trying to get the hospital connected, work with the EMR, those things, right, those little roadblocks you run into. But if we can just go connect with the patient, pull the information in, it just it makes it a lot more easier there, right? And then we can just connect with the patient, clinical trials, right? If you want to connect with clinical trials, we will have patient information, right? Can help identify patients that could be matches for those clinical trials. They go back, try it again, or find matches of patients that have, students that have immunization records that have an issue, getting those over. We can help match those with schools, and it's so on and so forth, right? It's just for us, the output of this is infinite, right? Just how you put it together. But again, my focus is making sure the foundation was there. I get it, like there's so many places, so many people are doing so much great stuff in healthcare that's 20 times bigger than us, got bigger names in that space. I applaud all that. I've watched it for the last 6 or 7 years. I just kind of sat in the background and did what we did well, try to do that part of it well.
I think that's very well put, Chris. But I also think there is a movement going on here, right? It's almost as if, I think uh, there was a time when priests had to interpret the word of the Bible, or they had to tell what that really meant and what was actually intended. And then the printing press comes along, and then people are like, okay, no, there is a incremental unlock in how things are interpreted and how people are able to access
Yeah.
this information, right? Like I think with AI, in one way, yes, there is a lot of things that unlock, but I think it unlocks clinical thought to the common man, right? Like now they're able to
Yeah.
understand what the practitioner was talking about. What are my next best steps? They don't have to go and ask a doctor hundreds of questions to get clarity on what's up with them. And we're seeing so many. Again, like I had this talk with e-patient Dave, great guy, and I mean he also
Yeah.
is like,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's almost like, do you think with MatchRite Health at least, right? Do you see a point where more and more of care is delivered through the platform? Because again, it's always the entry points that are able to change behavior, right? If patients are already using your application and they are already connecting with different EHRs and all of this data is right in here, What is your take? Do you think you can then change how patients interact with health systems by just adding new features?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. You get feature scope right from the start, right? That happens because you see to your point, you see the end result of where you want to get, right? To that point. But I think you're absolutely right. Is like, could we build a standard of how patient information is shared, right? Are we there yet? Who knows, right? But what I do, we just stay true to what we're building. But I think you're right, is that making a legible view up for the patient, right, to interpret using your Bible version of that stuff, which just makes so much sense. I get it because you go now to the King James version of the Bible. Everybody knows that one, but there's so many different versions of that exist now that everybody interprets it in their own different way, right? Their own different language and their own different connection point. But if there's always one source of truth that I know, right? Grew up playing in church and being in church, is the King James version. Like I can always go to King James version and maybe a little off from everybody else's, but I know that at least is in line with everybody else is saying to that point. So to your point, right, MatchRite could be the piece to where at least there may be some nuances between other applications, but it could be right, and it's in line with everything else that's going on. So you're absolutely right. I think it's plausible and possible. And I also think that from the standpoint of where we're growing into is I think we're leaning into that now. We were kind of messing around with some AI on our application. We're like, all right, we have all this data, summarize it, right? Summarize what this is. And we're kind of shocked at what it came up with. It's right on core of right interpretation. But then you run into the issues now, with patients getting information. And I've heard this before. It's like, what if patients are self-diagnosing and doing all this stuff? And you get that feedback a lot. And I'm like, well, heck, they're doing that anyway. It's like, how do you stop it? If you're looking for something, you're going to find it, right? In that sense. If it was me, and I go back to my stories, like my son, Aiden, that I was just showing his records, he's autistic. So just his diagnosis. So, but you just don't know with Aiden, we just don't know how independent he's going to be over time. And he may be just as much inspiration for this as my son CJ was, because when I found out he was diagnosed is when I really drove for this, right? Because at that time he had physical therapy, all the occupational therapy, all the stuff was happening. Here we are again, 10 years later, doing this all over again. But what's interesting about, like, from Aiden's standpoint is as being a patient, is that what can AI do, seeing all his records, seeing his progress over time, to see where his growth is, right? That's something that the doctors can't really tell us, right? Because they're not in every meeting. He's had 5 doctors since we've met with him. Two pediatricians, but 5 different doctors, that over time, we are the source of truth, us as a patient, right? We're the one single source that's connected to all these pieces. And AI is only as accurate as the data that it has, right? So the data it has is coming from one source, right? It's limited. So could patients not self-diagnose, but have more informative information as they go to the next practice? Absolutely they can, right? Because the goal is to unify this in one space and then help us understand, like, all right, this is what they told us when when Aiden was 5. Here's what they told us at 10. At 11, he's doing this now. I think we got a shot, right? And I think that would be when we go to his next doctor later, more informed, more in slash understanding where things are. And I'll even take this back to my son, CJ. So, and this is really important. When my son was diagnosed, he had a brain tumor. He had a DIPG, a brainstem glioma. It happens. I think at that time it was like 3 to 4% of kids would get it. Zero survival rate at that point. So we knew when he got diagnosed, the doctor said he's going to die within an hour, within a year. I'm sorry, within a year. And that year's journey, in 11 months he passed. Do you know we did everything in our book? I mean, look for medicine all the way to Mexico, wherever. I got a box of all that stuff that we were trying, right? And things we were looking at. So where sometimes with acute issues, right, it's not even self-diagnosis, it's a freaking fight, right? And those are the things I think that we overlook sometimes, whatever, with patients, that when you're in these acute conditions, you're in a fight, right? And that covers about 25% of Americans are more got acute conditions you're fighting with. Is they're in a fight, right? If we can help provide information to help you to help you at least leverage that fight, then that's what we want to do, regardless of everything else around it, right? But I was in a fight then. We was looking at everything out the gate. So if there's some tools, or I can pull information the way I at least guide me in the right direction, then that's what I need to have. So I think these tools can help in a lot of ways, because you're unifying records in one spot that your other doctor may not have, right? And you're trying to inform them. You're not going to remember all that stuff either, right? So there's a use to it for sure.
No, I think in a sense, if in the age of the AI that we have right now, if you do not provide proper access to this data, and if we are not also cross-checking and making sure everything is going the right way, I think it's unethical in a sense, right? Like so many diagnoses, so many
Yeah.
misdiagnoses are proven by ChatGPT to be like, okay, this is what you were actually looking
Yeah.
for. And this whole harm in self-diagnosing, I think it's like such a tiny minute percent that
Yeah.
I totally get what you're saying, right? Like I understand this. In a sense, the AI starts acting as this care coordinator, right? There
Yes.
is you
Yes.
have so many specialists who are good at one particular thing. They look at one organ system, they look at one particular part of the
Yeah.
body, but there is
Yeah.
not really someone who can like put everything together and make sense of it, and provide what the next best thing to do is.
Yeah, I think it's only going to grow, right? I think everybody, especially physicians, will kind of shun against self-diagnosis. Well, we don't want the patient to have this before we tell them what's going on, whatever. Well, and then I just had a question. Just it was 2 weeks ago. It's like, well, what happens if the patient finds this information and they're looking at it and they're calling doctors, panicking, whatever. And I said, unfortunately, and they asked the question was, how do you stop them from doing that? And my answer to them was like, is that you're gonna find what you're looking for, right? It may not give you the answers that you want, right? It may not be a piece, but you have to deal with that. I didn't want to hear that my son was going to pass within a year, but it was what it was, right? But having that information knows the fight starts, right? Again, we just want to help you coordinate the fight and navigate through where you can go and take as many of those long-term paths away, right? The forks in the road, take two or three of those forks in the road out the way. And if AI and tools like that can help you do it, then we're all for it, right? And I think the best thing for AI to be successful with is to have all the information, as much information as possible. And that's what we provide. So we can do that and get the information. There's third-party apps we can plug this patient history to. So just think of us as like a patient history tool, right? So we gather patient history. Anything that needs application, any hospital, any doctor needs patient history that the patient can provide, then we want to be able to provide that, right? Could we put a summary around that, right? Instead of giving all the stages of the patient. We didn't get into that in the app, but there's a summarization tool in there that you can summarize all this information. So there is some AI that's in there that can do that and can pass it off. Or I can pass all the data off to it. But there's ways that our goal, at least our job was, is to make sure data was there. The magic after that is there's a lot of brighter minds than me and us and what we do that's really working some really cool stuff. If we can be the facilitator of the patient history of that, then that's what we'll do.
Really good to hear, Chris. So, anything else that we want to cover before we wrap up the episode?
No, I think it's great, just connecting with you and touching base with you. I think there is a pathway into really providing, EMR solutions for smaller rural areas and stuff like that we could tap into. We're seeing a lot of disparate systems there, is that they can't afford the large systems, can't afford some of the smaller systems too. Is there solutions there? But there's a lot for us moving ahead. As we're looking to connect more and more with third party applications or people that's doing great work. Can we be a supplier of patient history in there, right? And really, this is our first time really coming out and me really talking about our technology that much and what we're doing because we don't really drive into, like I said, the chaos in healthcare, right? We kind of just stay in our own lane and kind of sit there. But we want to be helpful, right? In the same sense as that who can use this data, this free data that's from the freedom of sharing data, right? That's from third party application with less barriers. So we have a lot of freedom in sharing that data because a patient can assign and share it now. So there is freedom in sharing that data too. So I'm just excited about where things are headed, the pathway of helping people, right? And helping other applications, other companies help people, right? And that's the world that we're living in right now.
Excellent, Chris. So I will definitely leave a link to Chris's, LinkedIn and contact down below in the description. And MatchRite Care, I hope it grows a lot. And maybe, when the whole paternalistic attitude from doctors on like, okay, we are the only source of information, when that shifts, there needs to be a replacement for the real source of information, right? Which in your case is going to be the patient. And the patient
Yeah.
owns the data. They're able to do what they want with the data, and they just have access, right? Like they have
Yeah,
everything in one place. So
yeah,
excellent, Chris. Thanks a lot for taking the time,
absolutely.
and was a pleasure.